And basically I have notes. Let's see, let me get my book here. I'm going to do 4 shaft today because it's easier to do. So if you have this book, I'm actually going to be using kind of the twill setting, or the basically 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what I have my loom set at. And what I'm going to say are there are times to use floating selvages, and I'm going to look at my notes to make sure I have them. Well, first of all, you don't need them when you're weaving plain weave, like what I'm wearing, this tabby or plain weave. There's no need for floating selvages then, but I know there's some people that put them in all the time. But think about it. You don't really need it if you're doing a plain pattern. However, if all of a sudden you decide to change and do maybe a twill or something else, what could happen is your yarn is not catching that edge thread. Now, if it only happens maybe every 3 times or 2 times, to me, that's no big deal. If all of a sudden, though, you're really, really missing it, or maybe you're missing it altogether, you got to check things out. But I'm going to show you a trick. Let's see, when's another reason? Oh, when you are doing a pattern. I do these patterns, and I don't know if you can see it or not. Hopefully you can. If I hold this up, you notice where the heart's in along the edge, it kind of goes in a little bit. It caves in a little bit. It's a little overshot going on there. So what happens is, because you're doing a different threading or different weave, it's going to come in a little bit. Now, you can just allow it to happen, which is what I do. And I just kind of try to catch the edges, because most of it is plain weave. It slows me down. So that's why I don't like to use it. Yes, it's my opinion on that. Let's see. Another time is, if you are, 2 other times you might use them. If you're designing something or weaving something that's going to actually lay flat on a table, like a table runner or a placemat, right? But do you really have to worry about how straight the edges are on a scarf or anything that you're wearing, or if you're going to cut it up? So those are times you might not need to really be concerned about it. But again, that's my opinion. Anyway, that's where we are from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zero in on the computer, or I mean on the loom, and share with you some things that I do. So let me switch the loom, the camera over here. Now I'm going to get as close as I can. The problem is, with what I'm showing, you might have to zoom in if you want to see some things with your devices, whatever device that you folks have, or whatever device you're using. All right. First of all, I have the luxury to have a 4-shaft loom, let me get this over here, that has 10 treadles. Doesn't normally happen. I got extra ones. So I have my treadles tied up in a certain way. The threading is what we call straight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or maybe you go 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, whichever way. It just means that your diagonal line, if you're weaving one, one's going to go one way, one's going to go the other. So what I have is the tabby, and if you look at the loom here, I've been happily weaving away, weaving plain weave, and I'm not, you can see it's down here, and I've just been going on having a great time because that's what I want to do. But maybe I want to change, and I want to start weaving a twill. Well, this right here is a basic twill. If you've ever heard of 2-2 twill, and you're like, what the heck does that mean? Well, it means you have 2 tied up and 2 are not. If I use all of these, all 4 of those treadles, I'll get a 2-2 twill. Little terminology for you. Now here we have 1 and 3. Yes, it's a 1-3 twill. It's going to cover up more of my warp. So sometimes when you're trying things like that, you have some problems. But I'll show you and tell you what I do to avoid them. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to do a little weaving without the floating selvage. Now some people literally wind their floating selvage. Well, a floating selvage, what it actually means is that it might go through the heddle. It goes through the heddle, but it does not go through, through the reed, but not through a heddle. That's basically, it floats through there. And what happens is it's stationary and it doesn't move. So again, I will put one on in a little bit. But just for fun, let's just say I'm going to start treadling. Let's see what happens. I'm going to start with I'm going to do a twill, and I picked the blue, so hopefully you can see it. And again, zoom in. So I'm going to start weaving away, and I want you to watch. I always tell kids when I'm explaining twill to them, it's kind of like blue jeans, you know, the pattern for blue jeans. And here I go, and if you notice, I don't know if you can see what's happening. It's actually happening on both sides. So if I take my little pointer here, if you notice, it's not catching at all. Same thing on the other side. It's not catching. So right now I have an edge thread, nothing's happening. All right, should I go ahead and put the floating selvage on? Oh, let's not do that too quickly. What I've discovered, and I know there's some mathematical reasoning behind it, I just kind of play around with it. What I discovered is the first shaft, I'm lifting something's on 1 and 2, and when I do the second one, the 2 are both side by side. So I have 2 as the last one and 2 as the next one. I don't know if that has anything to do with it for sure or not, but let's try something else. Let me just do some tabby, go back to what we call plain weaver tabby, because I want to get back on that. Okay, now I started on, lost my paper here. All right, I started with this treadle. I'm going to go to this treadle now and start. Let's see what happens. So I'm starting on that one. So now I have to go back to the first one. Oh my goodness, isn't that cool? I don't have that float anymore. Or I don't have that time that it's not there. Oh, let's get to this. So if you notice now, it's caught. Now it's not perfect, not perfectly straight, and maybe not every single one, but what I call it is organic. And let me show you an example. This is a table runner that I did, and I did a twill weave, but you notice it isn't totally straight. Hopefully you can see it. I was going to get white paper and I forgot to get it. It's not total, but it's even. So you have to decide, how picky are you? And for me, I'm okay with that. Yes, I know this is going to be laying on the table. However, it's consistent. And again, call them organic. So in that situation, hey, easy peasy. I was able to fix that quickly. But let's say I want to do something else. Let's get our fun book out here. Let's say I want to do a zigzag. I'm going to go one direction, the other direction, back and forth, back and forth. Again, let's just see what happens without a floating selvage. Let me get back the other direction here. All right, so I'm going to start again. Let me get that out of the way. Now I'm going to go back. Well, so far, I don't know, it seems to be catching pretty well on both sides. I can see it's kind of catching, but it is skipping, you know, maybe a couple here. Let's see how far it goes. It could be skipping a few, and on one side, there's a longer, I don't know if you can see it again. You might zoom in on your own camera since I don't have a camera person here. It's a little bit more of a gap here, but it's catching better on this side. Again, you have to decide, am I okay with that? Or do I want to fix it? All right, let's take a look at another one before I actually put the floating selvage in. I'll explain that in a minute. Now, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. Just one of the shafts are going to go up at a time. But I'm going to come back to this side and start again. So let's see what happens here. I have to look at my feet. Where am I at here? All right. Well, again, it looks like, it is going to catch, maybe. Well, I'm watching both of these here. It catches, but again, I have to decide, do I like that? Is that going to work? Again, some of this shows up more now than it will after it's washed. All right, so you have to kind of think about those kinds of things. I guess what I'm basically saying is, before you go and rush and add a floating selvage, maybe try a different treadling sequence, start on a different treadle, or sometimes, for myself, I go back and forth on the tabby for a little bit, just to get it going. And then I'll start playing around with whatever the tie-up is and whatever the threading is. Of course, there are times, though, that nothing seems to work. Then I will get a floating selvage, or there have been times if I'm not catching the edge thread, I literally cut it and throw it the back of the loom, especially if I don't see it right away. If it's not going to make that big a difference in your end result, one thread, and you don't notice it right away, go ahead and do that, because maybe you're catching the threads on the second thread. So that's an option on those kinds of things. So anyway, those are my thoughts on floating selvages in that case. But let's say you want to use them. This is where my handy dandy clamps come in. Right now, I have two things I could do. If I wanted to use one and I want to use this thread, I could maybe cut it down here, take it out of the heddle and put it through. Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to move the camera in a minute when we do the next part. But let's say I don't have that luxury. I don't want to do that. What I'm going to do instead, let me get this out of the way here. This is thinner yarn just because I decided to use it. I didn't want to use the thick yarn. The edge thread can be something different, a little bit thinner, a little whatever. A lot of times people like to use the same yarn. So I have my clamp here. You can use anything. These are great. All right, let me move the camera a little bit so you can see hopefully the whole, what I'm going to be doing here in a minute. Let's see if it shows up. I'm waiting for the delay to show up here. Good. All right. I can see the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this thread in the reed. I put on not in the same reed as the last thread. I'm going to leave the clamp on here for now, and I will reach across here, bring it through, and then I'm going to walk around to the other side. I'll put the clamp on here, but I have to make sure that I drop them both at the same time. Whoops! Dropped that one too fast. Slipped right off. All right, let's see if we can get that back on there so it doesn't go so fast. All right, so now I have that one there. This is in the back floating. So it's just a little bit above all of that. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. You can always go under your first warp thread and to the right. Yes, that's the other, yeah. You can also purposely, what Sally's saying is that you can catch that thread with your shuttle. I think that's what you're saying there. That's what I do. If it's only, especially for my motifs, if I have a trouble with the motif here, I will do it for this part of it. But yes, you can also do that. It was another way of saving that. So yes, thank you, Sally. Forgot to write that idea down. Anyone has more ideas, welcome ideas. As you know, we don't all know everything. I always love to learn new things. Learned a really cool weaving technique at our weaving guild this week. It was really neat. Don't know if I'm going to try it or not, but it was pretty interesting. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Go on the outside here. Oh. And put that through. Yeah, there's so many ideas out there. There used to be a site that had all these tips on it. People would share their tips. I don't know if that's still around or not, but that was pretty nice to be able to check on that. All right, let's see if I can do this one without having it fall down. And I'll show you how it works. Again, you could have wound it on with when you were winding your warp and just use that edge thread if you want to. But sometimes it's like, darn it. I wish I had a floating selvage. Now, how does it work? And again, now we're all tangled up here. It also probably would help less draw in too. All right, Kathy. Yep. Now, the other thing too, it could also help to have, like I said, less draw in as well. All right, so now I have my floating selvage. How do you use one? Maybe some of you already know. Those of you who don't know, this is how I learned how to do it. Basically, you go over top here, and then what happens on the other side, it comes out underneath. Okay? And then I go to the next one. Again, I go over top, and then as I come through the other side, it goes underneath. And what's happening is catching that edge thread every single time. So you don't have to worry about, so if you want, have really, really cold selvages, you can do this. And for me, like I said, it slows me down because sometimes I notice that I don't always do it correctly, and I don't catch that last thread. So right now, we're catching that last thread. It's a thin thread right now, and you have to make sure that this does float a little bit. Sometimes when you're, and right now it doesn't float as much, but when you start weaving, it does. So let's see what happens if I do the other one, over top and under. Go over that, over top and under. And I would call this more of a weft-based pattern. So that would be the one way that you can make sure you're catching the selvage on every single edge. But let me again show you some, I don't know if I have all my boo-boos here. I have a couple, and I think I hid the one. Oh well. Well, let's take a look after something has been washed. Now this is very thin yarn. Now this thicker yarn is going to show the float and maybe get caught in something more likely than something like this. See if I can find it here close up. All right. Now in this case, if I can hold it close enough to the camera, if you can notice, it skipped probably about 4 threads on here. But then it caught a couple here, and then it skipped a couple, and then it caught. Well, on the other side, it was better. It really caught. Well, no, it didn't. It did the same thing. It skipped several, and then it caught several. Then it skipped some. But in the end, when you have your end product, like something like this, I'll hold it straight enough for you. It looks straight, doesn't it? Now, part of that is obviously practice, and some of it is just luck, and also the yarn. Some yarn is more finicky than other yarn. So in this case, and also this is blue on blue. If I was weaving with an opposite color, it might show up more. This is another, these are 4 shaft weaves. This is another one from the book. I did pretty well with this one as well. Came out, no floating selvages. A little, not perfectly straight, but it's okay. It's a wearable. It's something that you're going to wear around your neck, and it's going to be fine. Now here's another one. I just did this one. I was weaving one pattern, and then on this one, you can actually really see where it wasn't catching and then it was catching. Again, if you start weaving and your weaving is consistent, it looks fine. It looks like you planned that little border. The other side is a little different. Almost like there's a little pretty pattern on the end. I'm okay with those things. Again, not everyone is. I have some friends who decide they're using floating selvages all the time, and that's up to you. Let's see. The other one, if you're doing something like a pattern, now this is an 8 shaft pattern. Again, it went in a little bit. It curved in, but there's a tabby in between every pattern. It is catching along the edge there. However, the floating selvage may also allow that to come out a little bit farther. This is a towel. It's going to be hanging. If you want to put it on the table, it's okay. It has a little bit of a indentation in there. That's part of the pattern. It happens with a lot of overshot or other things. Over, under versus under, over. It won't create a difference. It just seems to work for me, but I think you can do the other way. I just noticed when I do that with the, so let me try the other way. Let's see what happens. If I would go under, I could press my hand down to catch it then. That would be another way of doing it, Sally. That's absolutely not a problem. It's not going to make any difference. You're still going to have the same catch every time. That's a good question, though. Like I said, that's the way I was taught or someone showed me, and I'm sure there's many other ways out there. That's why weaving can be so confusing sometimes, because we all have different ideas on how things should be done. All right, and here's another one. This is one of another 8-shaft pattern. Again, it didn't catch all the time. There's some little gaps here, but again, I call it organic. The other side is normally a little different. Same thing. A lot of times on patterns, these are twills. This is a advancing twill. So that's another thing. You can kind of look and decide on that. What you want to do on those different kinds of patterns. Let's see, where's my other one here? But again, like I said, on a plain weave, tabby, something like this, no need to do that. It's going to come out fine as long as your tension is okay. That's the other thing. You have to make sure your tension is all right on all of your products, anything that you're weaving. Now I do have one other thing. I'm going to show you what's on my loom over here in a minute. Let me move things around. I have another one to share with you. You might have to zoom in on it. See if I can get the loom close here. And this is an 8-shaft pattern. I'm not sure if you'll see what happens or not. This was another one that I actually had to play around with a little bit to get it to work right. So right now, this one, again, this is right now I can see there's 3 that are over, and then it kind of skips in a little bit. There's a little bit of indentation in there. It's very hard to see, but what I did with this one was I just started on the 2nd treadle, and I was able to catch the edge of that one. Again, you're kind of play around with it, decide what you want to do. If you decide you don't want to fight it, add that floating selvage and just get used to weaving with it. But again, if you're like me, you don't like to use a floating selvage if you don't have to, then you can find another way of doing it. Of course, you can also, let me move this over here so you can at least see me. I'll chat a little bit here. Move everything up. I have my little area here. If anyone else has some suggestions or some things that they've done that work, please share those. Or if you have any other kind of weaving questions, that would be great. Yeah, that pattern is pretty cool. And that pattern is the one I just showed you that was kind of the gold, black on gold. That is actually an 8-shaft twill pattern. And it's in that 8-shaft book. And it's very easy to treadle it's not a difficult one, but it looks pretty cool. That's what's always fun to do. Good. All right. I hope this has helped you in maybe your next project, or maybe one, like Julia said, she's weaving one right now. Again, take a look at this book, try different patterns, see what happens. And again, you can alter it any way you want to. Use either, like I said before, either add a floating selvage or cut the last thread off, maybe down here a little ways, thread it through and fix it. That's why for me, it's very important that I put on a little extra play area on all of my warps. So I can do 2 things. I can check out the pattern as I'm treadling it, and then I can also make sure that the color that I thought I wanted to use was going to work. For example, I did think maybe I would use this blue, but you know what? I really, really like the white. So I'm going to continue. I ran out of the one kind of white, and now I'm going to continue with this, but I think I'm going to do a twill for the rest of these, and these are placemats, some of the recycled placemat. And if anyone's interested, I actually have this pattern too available. I often use this same pattern, and I just change the colors and get all kinds of pretty designs on everything on there. All right, so if anyone has any questions later, you know where to find me. Thank you for sharing your time with me tonight, and I will see everyone wherever, whenever. I'll be behind the scenes. I'm not doing a show this month. I took it off, but I'll be out behind the scenes trying to connect people and make sure everything flows smoothly. Take care, everyone, and have a great rest of your evening or day.